Washington's got a major challenge on Junior Day.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hansen. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week later in the episode. Lars, we've got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're going to talk about Pro Day because it's finally official that Washington's Pro Day will be on Monday, March 10th. You and I are going to be there. We'll have a whole lot more from that as the time comes. We're going to talk about USA Today with their way too early Big Ten rankings. They put UW 12th, which feels shockingly low for both you and me. But we're going to get there in a few minutes because you and I, we were running through this with, just everything that's going on with Washington Junior Day this weekend, which has been the big theme of the week, where there are going to be 45 players on campus this weekend in terms of everybody from 2026, 2027, a couple 2028 guys as well. Brandon Huffin put out a complete list of guys that are going to be attending. And yeah, again, it's massive. Lars, there are not 45 coaches on this roster. So there's going to be a lot of moving parts this weekend.
There will be, but I think it's also, I'm sure some of those guys have interest in Washington, maybe some Washington commits in that list. So you say, okay, well, do you count them as a recruiter or do you count them as a guy that you're trying to recruit? I think kind of more so in the former category, like Anthony Sonoe, Terrence Sarian, Watson Lobe, like those guys can kind of play pseudo recruiter roles where it's like, hey, we'll go pair you with like this group and Joyce Harrell and this group and, Mark. And, you just go down the list. And because, we were joking. It's like, well, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, but you can kind of make it like a 4-to-1, 5-to-1 ratio if you really get creative. And so for me, it's about, first of all, the weather looks like it's going to hold out too, but it really does kind of present, it is part of a challenge, but it's, what's in a challenge is empowering. And I think that's, you look at the guys on staff, first of all, like Scotty Graham could host 100 guys on his own. Let's be real. Like, let's, hey, come over to the house. Let's just imagine Scotty and Jonah. Like, what could that president and vice president combo do? Oh,
fantastic. So let's talk about Jonah Coleman. So I'm really glad you said his name because that was somebody that I wanted to make sure we mentioned because when we talked to him at the beginning of February, one thing that I asked him about, you can go check it out over on our YouTube page and on all forms of social media, by the way, at Locked On Huskies. We did a little interview with him and we asked him about Jedd Fisch's culture. And one of the things that he said was, we find out on your visit if you can fit into the culture. So that's certainly something that we're probably going to see some of this weekend. And it plays into something else that he alluded to, is that players are big parts of recruiting. And that's true with every program, right? But it's something where with the way that Jedd likes to do things, and he's very, very meticulous, having a whole bunch of guys like Taitai Uyunglele, Jacob Manu, Takario Davis, a couple of the new names I want to make sure you mention, alongside Jonah Coleman, Ephesians Prysock, Damon Williams, who obviously originally committed to him in Arizona before following him up here, and a bunch of other guys in that vein that are embedded in Jedd's culture. Having guys like that on the visit to say, hey, this is what, it's like here. This is what is expected of you. Is this something you think you can fit in with? Because look, it's working out really well for us. This is how we like it, all those sorts of things. You can make it a 1-to-1 ratio, right? Why not throw Demond with Brady Smigiel? Why not have Dash Biley or Treston Keeney McMillan, whoever, go hang out with Caden Jones in the 2027 class? There are ways to find it, to make it work where it can be a true 1-to-1 ratio of players plus coaches to recruits, which I think is really interesting.
I'm really impressed, and this is not a shot at you, but just really impressed you didn't say one specific name that does share my initials. Landon Hatchett. That is also one guy.
That's on me. I should have.
But because I remember for people behind the curtain, I asked Landon, which will come. I think it'll come up it might not come up in the interview, but when you post the interviews from this past weekend on Locked On Huskies, where
Landon's tuned for this, by the way.
We're the guy that we all host, and obviously now that Guerin's back, now you have two brothers, and nothing really changes there. But Landon's been like, I asked a bunch of the offensive guys, like, hey, who's the recruiter on the staff, in this program? It's Landon. and it's not a slight to Jonah, but it's like, hey, like, especially with the offensive lineman coming in, Easton Taffa, you got Sam Uchi, you go down the list. The entire offensive line just hangs at the Hatchet's house for the weekend. Like that's just like, so you can kind of just shovel probably 5, 6 guys, 7 guys right there automatically. And then you think about, Redeaux and Bonner with Jonah. And I would imagine Dash will probably be in that mix as well with Tristan and Demond for Brady Smigiel, like you mentioned. And so it's not a matter of like, oh, is it going to be like you're going to hand them off to some just campus tourist scout? Like, sure. You're not doing that. But I do think it'll also in a way signify like which players are hosting and like where do they rank in the board, because again, these are all top targets for Washington, but some might be more likely flips than others, like we mentioned on the show. And so do you put a little bit more energy into those guys? Not that you don't put energy into the other guys, but just a little bit more than, just Bott also hang out with Jonah, where they don't play the same position, but you're like, look, in order to like get in the house, you kind of have to get the keys from the deed to the owner. And that's Demond and that's right. Jonah. So in a way where it's like, you're also going to have intermingling. You're not, because we are referencing guys playing those specific positions. I think it really is a team culture. And then you also have to factor in the family element where John Richardson's wife seems to be playing a big role. Amber, we know, plays a big role. And so it's not just like, same thing, like, I know it's a reach. It's not exactly a like-for-like comparison, but like Miss Terry at Alabama, when all the stories of when, players would come over, she would cook breakfast for them when the recruits would come into town and things like that. All those little things add up. So you might not see like, oh, hey, they don't have that many staff, but it's like Washington is a big family. And that's the whole point of Jedd emphasizing the family culture here is it's like, we might not have a 1-for-1 ratio on coaches to visitors. But also, who does when you have 40 plus visitors coming into campus?
Yeah, exactly. That's a big part of this as well, right? But I'm really glad you framed that the way you did. We're talking about everything else that goes on outside of the program, because those are all things that we've seen behind the scenes. We talk about it on social media. Amber Fisch will post like, oh, hey, look at the, this UW pickleball court we're building in our backyard. Different little things like that. Like, they might seem small and insignificant right now, but it's something where, oh, hey, check that out. Maybe we'll, on your official visit, you can come back and we'll do different things. We can do this, we can do that. Those are all little things that could pay off down the line. And in terms of junior day this weekend, which is going to be a 2-day event, because a big part of this plan seems to be having everybody go to the men's basketball game on Sunday, which you and I are going to be there. So we'll keep an eye on that as well. That gives all the position coaches more time to get one-on-one FaceTime with everybody at their position, because, you referenced Bott Mulitalo. Why is he not going to spend a whole lot of time with Jason Kafusi, his uncle? Like, that's certainly going to be part of that. Derek Colman-Brusa is probably going to end up hanging out with his brother a decent amount while he's around, just to reference some of the top targets there. And as you continue to go around, you can see, okay, yeah, it makes sense for this coach to hang out with that guy. Like, to reference a couple of the newcomers on the coaching staff, Jalil Wadood, he's probably going to end up spending a significant amount of time with some of the guys from Los Angeles. I'm really curious to see who Marcus Griffin might end up, hanging out with, because that's somebody who's from the area, played defensive line. So maybe that's something where, hey, let's give him a decent amount of face time with Derek Colman-Brusa, and he can have that kind of conversation with him. There are a lot of different ways that it could work out, which is going to be really interesting to keep an eye on, because it is a big challenge when you think about it, where the more you go back and you listen to just everything we've talked about this week, where, hey, oh, here comes Bott Mulitalo, here comes Derek Colman-Brusa, Brady Smigiel, Deshonne Redeaux, Brian Bonner, Mason James, exactly. You keep adding up the names and it's, whoa, wait, hold on a second. There's a whole lot for the coaching staff to have to figure out here. The logistics of this are going to be very difficult. So seeing what that might look like, and Lars, you and I peek behind the curtain for all the everydayers. We're going to try to get a couple of these guys on the podcast to discuss what it was like during the unofficial visit. So I'm really curious to see what some of these recruits might have to say by the end of the weekend. And Lars, let's shift gears here a little bit though, because USA Today has vastly underrated Washington. We'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Nissan. The Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On College basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart. From top-seeded stars to the unexpected upsets, these guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week are the Houston Cougars. Since joining the Big 12 last season, the Cougars have gone a combined 33-4 in conference games, winning the regular season title by multiple games both years. There is no team in college basketball that more capably embodies the rugged Armada than Kelvin Sampson's squad. Houston's tenacious defense leads the nation in fewest points allowed per game for the second straight season. When it comes to Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Houston Cougars have done here. It's clear that our team of the week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's new outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure at shopnissanusa.com. So Lars, USA Today comes out with their early rankings for the Big Ten, and Washington is ranked 12th. And this is something that we talked about on the Lockdown Big Ten Squad show a couple weeks ago, is returning production. That's really low for Washington. And I feel like that has, just in terms of, between that and going 6-7, where you lose a couple of games to close out the year after Oregon and then the Sun Bowl, obviously, Washington doesn't necessarily have the best view in a national light right now, but I think that even 12 is a little too far underrated for what Washington has coming back.
So just be clear, we're blaming you for this, right?
Yeah. Blame me.
Cool. Just be clear. But no, because I always say for a random plug, so I think Athlon also came out, which I had no part in doing. Ranking the quarterbacks, and Deshonne was, I think, like 12th, like 10th or 12th.
Oh, he was 10th behind Julian Sayin, Dante Moore, and Bryce Underwood were all ahead of him. I wrote about that over on Huskies Wire. We're going to get to that at some point in this show as well. Yeah.
But the reason why I bring it up is to say it's kind of understandable that Washington is just being glossed over, because Damon, to be fair, did not start the entire season. So you're not going into it thinking, hey, we've seen a whole season of Damon, and as much as we saw this season, 6-7, nobody's really going to pay attention to you. It's kind of that run of 2021 to 22 where we're thinking, hey, this team actually could be pretty good, as long as Mike pans out and, everybody stays healthy. Like, there's enough talent on the roster. And I think that is something where it's kind of a benefit to Washington, where you're kind of you're not everyone's target, and you can kind of become that surprise target, similar to what Jedd did in 23 at Arizona, which was nobody was expecting 10-3. But you kind of just look at it and think, hey, they got Fafita, they got a couple nice pieces, but nothing really else there. And then you look a couple years later, it's like, actually, no, they actually had DeCario, they had Jonah, they had Fisch, they had Jacob. You go down the list of guys that they had. And I think it's not a surprise position, because, again, we both understand the perception of Washington nationally. Nobody's really – it's not Jedd's fault. It's not like – there's not really people would say, oh, hey, Jedd should go do more interviews and go do whatever. I mean, Jedd should join Locked On Huskies sometime, but that's neither here nor there.
That'd be great.
But when he goes on Rich Eisen, and before he talked to the media a couple of weeks ago, those are great moves, but it's not like, out of nowhere, everyone's going, hey, consider Washington. That's what you call bought, not earned. And so I think Jedd would rather have it be earned and say, you know what? Yeah, we're not one of the top 10 best teams in the Big Ten. I would love the heel turn from Jedd right now with the John Cena news, because it's like, why not lean into, you know what? We don't really have a ton coming back, like you mentioned. We only went 6-7 last year. Yeah, people should be writing us off, and use that as the kind of reverse psychology field, because we both know there's talent on this team.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the things I wanted to mention here was that there is talent on this team. And it feels like with this ranking, one of the things that is a little hard to wrap your head around, in my opinion at least, is the fact that Washington pulled in a really strong class from the transfer portal. And it starts at the top with DeCario Davis, who has a legitimate argument to be the best cornerback in college football this upcoming season, where if he plays at the level he did the last time he was under John Richardson, he's going in the first round. He's probably going in the top 15. Like, that's the level of talent that you're able to bring in right there. And obviously that wasn't your biggest need, but you don't turn down a talent like that, especially somebody who knows your program really, really well. But then you go down the list and you talk about the defensive line. The additions there are really solid. In Samote Pepa, in Ontario Thompson, in Taitayu Uiagalelei, where you add those three guys to the mix, and all of a sudden, hey, that depth, if a couple of the guys that you already have there take a step forward, like that's solid enough where it's not bottom half of the Big Ten, in my opinion. And then combining that with an offensive line that is bound to take a step forward, with Landon Hatchett having a full year starting, not coming off a knee injury, adding Carver Willis to the mix, adding Maximus McCree, who looked really good with, more time to add weight and get ingrained in the system after missing 2 months with a dislocated thumb. Like, those aren't issues you're going to face this year. Yeah, it's still a big challenge on both sides of the ball. So I understand, we're not sitting here saying, hey, Washington should be 4, Washington should be 5. We're not saying that. But putting them this far down just feels like you're glossing over all of the moves that they've made over the course of the offseason, plus all the injury luck that they suffered last year, which as one of, there are many reasons why Washington finished below 500. We're not denying that, but injury luck was certainly a small part of that as well.
Yeah, and then when you compare it, what's the ratio of gloss over to glazing? Other programs, and you just kind of again, you look at it and say, it's like Julian's saying, like, could he be better? Sure, maybe he ends up being a top 5 quarterback in the Big Ten. So be it, but haven't seen it. At least with Demon's giving you a hint at the whiteout. Again, the Oregon game is kind of a mixed bag of, like, he could have been sacked 20 times, so he should get some credit, but also then, he did get sacked 10
But it's
times.
not even – sorry, let's dive into that, though, because I wanted to make sure we brought that up, so I'm glad you mentioned that. Let's talk about that Oregon game, because it's one of those things where you look at it and you just see – if you just look at the box score and you say, oh, wow, he was sacked 10 times, but you also see, hey, he completed 85% of his passes for over 200 yards plus a touchdown. He looked really solid in that game, and that's one of those things where that's an important part of this, where with this 12 ranking as well, where Demond has shown what his, I don't even want to say that the Sun Bowl is his ceiling, because I think it's higher than that. But you see the Sun Bowl, you see Penn State, as you mentioned, you see what he did against Oregon, where the result wasn't what you wanted. But if you look at that game and pin that loss on Demond Williams, you didn't watch the game. Like, it's one of those things where he is one of those guys that can continue to elevate Washington from a 6-6, 6-7 team to 9-3, to 10-2, because he has that kind of talent.
And I can tell you right now, Demond and Decker ain't gonna miss that connection like they had in the Penn State game. I'll just say I'm comfortably willing to bet that throw will hit this year where it didn't hit last year. And I think, as both were freshmen, so it's understandable. But, ironically enough, I think the way that Demond ended up, and certainly the way that kind of Jedd brought some of those Arizona guys up, it was people nationally didn't take a huge notice, because it's like, oh, well, Jedd brought half his program from Arizona is the national understanding. But they don't really dive into, who did they bring, and then how did they look? Because a lot of them we didn't see, the Michael Watkins, Jordan Washington. And so there's so much of this team that we still haven't. That's part of the guys that you're bringing a lot of talent back who was on the roster last season, but not a ton that played. And I think that is the other kind of the reverse Denzel Boston, where coming into last year, Denzel had played, been on the roster, but we hadn't seen what he could truly do. Now we saw what 1 year it is. Now let's see if he can take another step. But it just, again, especially on March 4th, 5th, whenever that story came out from the USA Today, you think anybody's really diving deep into Washington just yet? Like, I think it's like, when the Super Bowl happens and you say here are the way too early odds for Super Bowl 2026. We don't even know who's going to be the quarterback of certain teams next year. And it's like, obviously you can kind of make an educated guess. Georgia, XYZ schools, Ohio State maybe, but I think this year actually in college football, it does seem a little more wide open than it has been. Like, I can't think of a team where you can point to them and say, they're winning the national championship next year, and it's not close. We should just pack it in and whatever. This might actually be the best year for Washington to emerge in that group of, hey, you know what? They're a dark horse contender. It's probably where you'd put them, but nobody's really thinking about that, in early March. Whereas by the end of May, people might that number 12. I wouldn't be surprised if they're 8 in that respect. Where it's like, hey, like maybe they added a couple more pieces in the spring portal, and now we're actually starting to get closer to the season, so we're going to pay attention. But yeah, I mean, I think Washington, They can sit at 12. That's fine. And then just more fodder for the, predictions that we make on Fridays.
Oh, absolutely. So I agree with you there. Let's kind of combine the Athlon list where Demond is at 10 with this one, where we look at this USA Today list and you see Ohio State at 2, Oregon at 3, Michigan at 4. All 3 of their quarterbacks are ranked ahead of Demond Williams. And I combine a whole bunch of different things in my head right there. But I look at that list and I say, Julian Sayin threw 49 yards last year. Dante Moore threw for 84. Bryce Underwood has not taken a snap at the college level. And it's one of those things where that's where I take the most, I'm taken aback the most by these rankings, because Washington deserves, and Demond Williams especially deserves a little bit more respect than that, where he is at the very least started games. I know Dante Moore did at UCLA. Julian Sayin has not. Bryce Underwood has not. And I understand that, part of the USA Today side of things, at least, is taking in, hey, these teams recruit really well, and we expect them to just, this is going to be a seamless transition here. This is going to be a seamless transition there, that sort of thing. But it feels like that gets discounted, to your point, with schools like Washington, where it's, hey, no, everything at Washington is set up really, really well for this team to have success moving forward. And that could be as soon as this season, where the schedule lines up a lot better. And the more you dive into it, the more you say, all right, 8-4, 9-3, that is very, very realistic when you look at where this team has to travel to, what teams have to go to Husky Stadium, unlike last season where you're playing 3 college football playoff teams on the road. And it sets up way better than I think a lot of people want to give it credit for. And when it makes me really excited to get out there for spring practice and just see what it's going to look like, because there is a whole lot to be excited about with this team. But Lars, speaking of getting on campus, we're going to be there on Monday because there are 14 Huskies going to be participating in Pro Day. So Lars, as we kind of look ahead to Monday, we don't expect everybody on this list to get drafted. Let's be real here. Unfortunately, 1, maybe 2 or 3 guys are going to end up hearing their names called within the 256 picks, whatever it is now, of the NFL draft. But as I look at it, I can't help but be excited, because these guys are going to get an opportunity to work out in front of NFL scouts and just have that opportunity that they didn't get at the NFL Combine, where only Carson Bruner attended. Did very well, by the way. Shout out to him. But as I look at this, there are a couple of things that really stand out to me. What's the number one thing for you?
I mean, honestly, it's the number. Like, if you think about like how many guys you would think would be at a pro out this past season, I would have thought, 8 to 10, 7, 8, 9, 10. You kind of in that mode, because you mentioned Carson, and then you go Cam Fab, Cam Broussard, maybe Will Rogers, Alfonso, and then from there it's like, okay, who else was put themselves in a good enough position. But I think that's a lot of this could be a crop of, you're not going to see a ton of guys drafted, but there's enough guys that maybe make UDFAs, where, you look at a guy like Enoch, where started for an entire season, showed he could do it. Maybe he gets a practice squad spot, or maybe he there's always, especially offensive line, it's kind of the one where especially you just look and say, hey, nobody really wants to draft him, but maybe you beat out a guy in training camp or whatever, and you're able to earn a backup spot. I could see Enoch doing that, and a few other guys. Sure. But you look at that list overall, and it's a healthy list. It's a good, and also probably in that same mold be Giles Jackson, where you look at a guy where had enough production, certainly has the speed to get it done. That's a guy where, again, does he get drafted? We'll see. But I think there's a difference between getting drafted and making a roster, and there's a different energy into making a roster, which a lot of these guys have. That Kaleki Latu would be another one, where you kind of just look at that you have enough NFL potential to find a way onto a roster, or at least earn a training camp invite and push yourself in position to figure it out.
No, I absolutely agree. Because Giles Jackson was the number one thing I wanted to talk about, because I'm very excited to see him run. And a lot of this is, I'm going to take a little shot at Oregon here, because I feel like I have to. After watching Tez Johnson run a 4.55, whatever it was, at 150 something pounds with that size, like, I understand he's got the production, he's got all other things. I'm not trying to knock him in that regard, but you look at the athletic testing numbers, which is it everything? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But it's something. And the NFL has showed you that time and time and time and time again. So with some solid testing numbers, we know Giles can run. You and I expect him to go, probably sub 4.45 at the very worst. Like that certainly seems to be the ballpark that he can run in. And I don't know if that's going to be enough to get him drafted, but combined with what he showed on tape this season, what Jedd's offense did for him, if he can put up some solid numbers in some of these agility areas, plus the 40-yard dash, I think that he's going to have as good of an opportunity as anybody to make it onto a roster. And it's not just because of what he can do as a receiver. It's of what he can do in special teams. We've seen him return kicks. We've seen him return punts, and to show that versatility, that's going to be very, very important. And it's something that, again, combined with some of these other numbers in receiver class that, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts that we don't need to get into because this is Locked On Huskies, not Locked On NFL Draft. But a receiver class that is very, very intriguing at the top, but it really does fall off, in my opinion, at a certain point. And Giles, due to some constraints, mainly height, in my opinion, he will probably end up going undrafted, which is unfortunate because he's got the athletic profile, he's got all those other things, and it's going to be really, really intriguing to see what teams think of him after he puts it out there on tape.
Another thing to consider with Giles is he did a solid for UW. Took one for the team in 24. And I think when you think about that, and I thought teams are going to look and, with all the deep, with the trade requests and things going on in the NFL right now, shout out DK. Not that they're the same receiver, but Giles is a great teammate. And I think that's something that you can't go understated, where a lot of guys might not get opportunities because either their head's not in the right space or they're just not, good locker room fits. All 14 of these guys can go in the locker room of any NFL team and find a way to fit in. I think that's the other side of this, where your availability, draftability, all those sorts of things, are you able to be welcoming and things like that? I think they are. And like another guy in that similar mold is Jeremiah Hunter, where a guy who does have the size, but didn't have the production, but did have some decent production at Cal. Do NFL teams look and say, okay, well, what happened here at Washington? Why did it not work? Or was it just a case of, hey, maybe he was more of a decoy this year and Denzel was the recipient and those sorts of things. But I think overall, it's a good, healthy list that kind of you can look at every single position group. You got receiver, you got a quarterback, you got some running backs, linemen, linebackers, and safeties, and think, okay, this is, again, almost in a way, it's what Jedd did in 25, late or 24, where you lay the foundation. You're laying the every next year. I don't know who the quarterback is going to be. Actually, Kai Horton will be the quarterback. But you're looking at every year when you're coming to pro day, are you developing quarterbacks? Are you developing running? Like Jonah, next year will be the running back. Guarantee you he'll get drafted. Then you look at receiver, Denzel, he'll get drafted.
Yeah.
Tight end, so be it. But you look down the line and think, okay, every year NFL teams can come to Washington's pro day and say, there's going to be somebody at every position. Maybe they're not drafted at every position, but there's a guy worth at least watching and evaluating. I mean, like Will Rogers. We should probably have a discussion about Will Rogers, because as I was thinking about this, it's like, how does Will surmise his time at Washington? What did he get out of his time at Washington? Because a lot of it was, hey, I'm going to try and prepare for the NFL and get ready in a pro style system. And then we saw how it went about. But to me, it's like, well, yeah, but again, look at Jake Browning, where he wasn't the most wow quarterback, sat behind a guy for a couple of years and then earned a starting spot. And I think he's making like $10+ million now over his latest contract or whatever it is. But the point being, just because you're not a top quarterback doesn't mean you don't end up sticking. And then now Jedd can say, hey, Will Rogers had a 6-7 year career in the NFL before he went into coaching. And how did that start? Mostly in Washington, because I don't think he's going to credit Mike Leach for developing into a pro quarterback. He'll get you the yardage, but I don't think he necessarily was the best to get him ready for the NFL.
So you just made the point as perfectly as possible, where it is that pro style offense. That's what he came here to learn. That's what he came here to be a part of. He thought it was going to be with somebody else, but that's what he came here to do. And that's what Jedd is selling. It's, hey, I learned my offense from Mike Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay. I learned my offense from those guys, and now I need you to run it. So that is a really important thing, where he has the numbers. He has the stats. He didn't need to go out and throw for 4,000 yards for teams to take notice of him, because he already has all those numbers out there. If you go look him up on Sports Reference or CFB Stats, whatever site you use, like, it's already on there. He came here to really get in tune with what it takes to succeed at the NFL level. Now, you're right. He's probably not going to get drafted. This is a really weak quarterback class as it is, unfortunately, at the top, or, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, whatever. Or I look at what he can do, and it is Jake Browning. Again, that's why I say you described it so perfectly, because he can go on and just be a career backup if necessary. And if he needs a spot start, where Jake is just in the perfect situation with 2 of the 10 best receivers in football, like, it must be nice to throw the ball up, and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins are going to come down with everything. But that's the situation that Will Rogers could find himself in, where, like, Brock Purdy is an example of somebody who just got thrown into a really great situation. And you could find those around the NFL. And if somebody just says, hey, I like Will, I think, he's got a good head on his shoulders, and he's somebody who we can come in, teach the system, and he'll be prepared if we need him. That's all you can ask for. Like, at certain points with the backup quarterback, if you have somebody who understands what needs to be done, and from everything Jedd has told us and from what we've been able to gather from the times we've talked to him, he is exactly that kind of guy who will always be ready and always be prepared. But Lars, one guy that I wanted to make sure we talked about before we got out of here is Voi Tunuufi, because he is in the same mold as Giles, where I don't know if he'll end up getting drafted, just because I think teams are going to see whatever he's going to measure in at, probably 6'1", 280, somewhere in that mold, and say, yeah, that's not somebody that we can use as a run defender more often than not. That's not somebody who we're going to have drop a whole bunch of weight and play edge after we watch his film. So he's somebody who's probably going to end up sticking in that tweener mold, where he's really good, but as a guy who's probably not going to be much of an impact on downs that aren't 3rd and long. So I think that this is going to be a very crucial day for him, because if he is able to show up and test well and show up and just do everything that he needs to, we know he's a very coachable guy. We know he's one of the, just honestly, the most respectful people we've been on the roster, where they're all really great kids, but Voi is somebody who is just out of this world, where every time you talk to him, he comes up and gives everybody a fist bump, asks everybody how you're doing. Just everything like that. It's those little things that NFL teams take notice of. And with somebody like Voi, combining that with what he's been able to do as a pass rusher, mainly from the interior, you can find a home for a guy like that, but you need an up close and personal look before you can say, hey, I want this guy as a priority UDFA, which is what he could turn into.
It's a perfect example of what Steve Belichick said, where I'm sure if you ask Steve Belichick, hey, what do you think about this guy, Voi Tunuufi, when he first got here? It's like, size, we'll see what happens. But then he goes through a spring practice, and it's like, oh no, we got to find a way to get this guy. Like, he will be one of 11. I don't know where he'll be or what he'll play, but he's too good to keep off the field. And I think in a similar mold, the NFL is going to say, somehow, some way, dude's going to make a roster, or find a way to at least earn a spot to make a roster, because again, like, he doesn't have the measurables, perfect measurables, but he's got more heart and more determination than most people he can't measure. And I think that's why he's going to land somewhere.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank to all of you for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. You have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comments section. And if you're audio only, please leave us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.